Something of a shocker at this point, given how long and how hard everybody's been negotiating on a transaction that would involve, of course, as I've reported so many times, Scott, Skydance and its partner, the private equity firm Redbird, taking control of Paramount through a complex transaction. But key as well to that transaction is also getting the control shareholder, Shari Redstone, to agree to a deal in which she would sell that control stake. That control stake is housed in a company called National Amusements. Roughly 70% of the vote is there. There was an economic agreement, roughly $2 billion that would be paid to Shari Redstone and NAI to transfer control of NAI and therefore control of Paramount to the Skydance Redbird team. What I have learned, and I think other outlets have similarly, at least the Journal has potentially learned as well, I couldn't quite get up here fast enough, is that even though there had been an economic agreement reached, there was an inability somehow to reach agreement on what are being termed to me non-economic terms so that a deal could go forward. And that has been basically presented to the special committee of Paramount's board, which is now not going to vote one way or the other. They're the special committee, of course, that is apparently looking after or is looking after the best interests of the B holders, for example, of other shareholders. But they won't have a deal to vote on if the control shareholder is not going to do their deal. So I don't know the specifics of what I'm told are fairly small items. Again, non-economic in nature, Scott. Mm-hmm. It was my understanding, by the way, that through this weekend, in fact, they had reached agreement broadly on things dealing with legal indemnification. There will inevitably or would inevitably been lawsuits, for example, involving this. So how small these deal points were is not completely clear, though they do not appear to have been major deal points, and again, not economic in nature, nonetheless enough to completely upend a transaction that, again, has been in the works and been negotiated tirelessly on both sides for many months. This very well is the end, conceivably, of Skydance's continued negotiations to try to buy this company. Whether it results now, Scott, in another potential bidder for NAI that would not involve paying $15 to 50 for half of the shares to the B holders, that would not involve, obviously, the merger of Skydance, the studio, into Paramount. Whether that will still come to the fore, unclear at this point. But what does appear to be becoming clearer is that deal's not going to happen.
You know, David, you've reported on this out front every step of the way. And as you know, Skydance wasn't the only potential player here, too. And you've reported on the others along this journey as well. I want your reaction to a headline I see now, speaking of what the next step in all of this might very well be. The Journal says that Redstone is unlikely to try merging Paramount in another company. I guess the suggestion being that the whole thing is done. Is that how you would take that headline? And then if so, where would that leave Paramount and National Amusements and Ms. Redstone herself?
Yeah, good questions. I think what they mean by that is what I would also say, which is the likelihood of Paramount itself merging with a Skydance. Or, again, I reported for quite some time on the interest of Sony and its partner Apollo, which never really seriously mounted a bid here. That's not going to happen. So the other possibility is that she gets an equal to or perhaps higher price for her control stake in NAI, sells that, departs the scene, although, frankly, remember, she still owns 32 million B shares, and then leaves it to be somebody else's problem. Scott, what I would say when it comes to some of these other names that have been out there, the latest being Edgar Bronfman, is that they are subject to due diligence, that with the stock being down and perhaps continuing to fall, remember, this is a company right now that doesn't have one CEO. It's got a three-headed triumvirate running it at this point. You know, what in the world do you really expect you're going to be able to get in terms of economic value, somebody taking control of this company, if they don't have a full plan in place, if they don't have another asset that they feel they can merge in that will actually create value? Very much unclear to me what that would actually look like or mean So, yeah, you can talk about other potential bidders for NAI. Again, not for doing anything with Paramount per se. It just remains a public company. None of it gets bought, as was the plan under the Skydance, where you'd have, the opportunity to tender as much as 50% of your shares at $15. And then I guess this new control shareholder over time figures out a new plan. We'll see if anything really comes to the fore. What would appear more likely from my perspective at this point is that Shari Redstone stays in control, NAI retains its voting stake as is, and maybe they start to make some moves in figuring out who's going to manage this thing. Still to come. A lot of fingers being pointed right now. I've spent a lot of the day, as you might imagine, on the phone. Any number of people want to say, well, there's a special committee director named Charles Phillips, once was president of Oracle, has decided he just would not allow a deal. He's had a lot of conversation and a lot of contact with Shari Redstone and turned her against the potential transaction that she once seemed quite supportive of. There are others who simply say that her lawyers at Ropes and Gray and the lawyers at Latham representing Ellison were simply unable to come to some sort of agreement, again, on this minutia that I've heard about. But ultimately, it's her decision. And Shari Redstone apparently said, no, even though you're willing to pay me $2 billion, I'm not going to do it. And there's a lot of other emotional factors that you might imagine figure in here. Remember, National Amusements has been in her family for a very long period of time. This is about her children as well, in terms of securing their estate, so to speak. I can't speak to all of it, Scott, but it is a curious conclusion at this point to what has been obviously quite a drama.